Good afternoon and welcome to today's CLE webinar. I'd like to first start off by doing an acknowledgement. Legal Aid Queensland acknowledges and respects the First Nations custodians of the land where our offices stand and where we work to help disadvantaged Queenslanders uphold their legal rights in our justice system. We pay respect to their elders, law, customs and creation spirits. We recognise that these lands have always been places of ceremony, teaching, research and learning, and we acknowledge the important role Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander peoples play in our community and improving our legal system. So thank you again for joining us. Today's topic is asserting your client's legal rights to tackle cost of living challenges. And our webinar will be presented by the always wonderful Paul Holmes, who's the Principal Lawyer of our Civil Justice Services Division here at Legal Aid Queensland. So just a little bit of housekeeping before I'll take it over to Paul. My name is Kiara. I'm the Community Legal Education Officer here at Legal Aid Queensland. So just to remind you, this webinar is being recorded. The laws and content is accurate on the day of the live presentation and may be subject to change. Information is on our Community Legal Education resources page on the Legal Aid Queensland website. And if you are experiencing any technical difficulties, unfortunately, we are unable to help and you will need to contact the GoToWebinar customer support team. So today's presentation is going to be approximately 40 minutes long with 20 minutes at the end of the questions and answers, but you're also welcome to send through your questions as the webinar
As those of you who've listened to me before, I'm happy for questions along the way because that'll help the discussion and help us focus on what you guys want to know about.
Wonderful, thank you, Paul. It's always great to have you here. So to type in a question, there is just a little question box at the bottom. So just type that in and we'll be able to see it and I can read them out. You'll also be able to access today's PowerPoint slides in a PDF form. So that would just be on the handout section on the bottom and just download that. But we will also send that out in our post-webinar email next week. So once this has been captioned and recorded, we'll send a copy of the slides too. So just to first poll to kind of get us started and have an idea of who's joining us today, I'll just pull that out. So I'm just launching that poll. So that is, which region do you work in? Southeast Queensland, Far North Queensland, Regional Queensland or outside of Queensland? And Paul, while they're just answering that, any of the legislation discussed today, is that more state or federal based?
The vast majority of it is federal based around financial hardship, but I'll highlight any state based legislation.
Awesome, thank you for that. All right, and we'll just close that off.
Yep.
Okay. So that's a great response, I'll just share that. So we have about 54% of people are from within Southeast Queensland, 18% are in Far North Queensland, 20% regional and about 9% out of Queensland.
And shout out to all those in Townsville and Ingham who've had another wet couple of days.
Yes, I can't believe that. Okay, so we'll just go into our next poll really quickly. So I'm just launching our second poll. So that's just, what is your role? So support worker, financial counsellor or health education worker, social worker, lawyer or other. We're definitely getting
lots of financial counsellors by the looks of it this morning.
Which is feels very imperative at this kind of time with everything going on. All right, so I'll close that one off. And we'll just share. Okay, so we had 3% are support workers, 64% were financial counsellors or health education workers, 5% social worker, and 14% are lawyers and 14% for other. And just one last poll. So how much experience do you have helping people struggling with financial hardship? This is or has currently recently been my core role. I have some experience, I have no experience, or I am currently experiencing financial hardship.
And I think that's a really important point. Sometimes the people helping people with financial hardship are also experiencing it.
Yeah, exactly. All right, so we'll close that one off, and we'll just share. So about 65% of our audience today, this either has or is their current role. 31% have some experience, 3% have no experience, and 2% are currently experiencing financial hardship themselves. So thank you so much for participating in that. So we'll just move on. So just briefly, what you will learn today is how to help your clients with financial hardship, the different approaches and legal requirements of financial hardship in the different industries, and what you can do if you feel a hardship response is not appropriate. So I'll take it over to Paul now.
Certainly. And what I'm proposing to do today is we've got a couple of case studies to go through. But just before we do that, it's just worth mentioning there's a lot of people in Queensland recently that have been affected either by the tropical low in North Queensland and the flooding there, or the effects of Cyclone Alfred. So it's really important while that's happening and the recovery started to be aware of all the potential grants your clients have a right to access, because that'll help with the financial hardship that disasters cause. And so things like there's Commonwealth government grants that people are available for people to apply for. There's also state government grants. Things like the state government has a Build It Back Better scheme for improving flood resilience in houses in North Queensland. I think there's grants of up to $10,000 there to, for example, move power points higher or move hot water systems higher so that when the next flood comes through, the effects are less. So it's really important, I think, to be aware of all of those. There's also a couple of banks floating around who are offering, I think it's a $1,000 grant to their customers that are affected by the various disasters that have happened in Queensland recently. So it's all of those things I think are really important. The other thing to remember too is we've now had people who've been affected by 2, 3, sometimes maybe 4 disasters in the last 3 or 4 years. That compounding effect will create financial hardship for people. And so I'd ask everybody to keep in mind all of those things as we're going through this, because while we haven't phrased the case studies in terms of disasters, they could equally apply.
Definitely. Thank you for sharing that too, Paul, because even just chatting before, there was a couple of, things that you don't think of, particularly after a disaster, and it just, like you said, compounds. So thank you.
And if you've had people who've had food spoilage and they've got insurance, remember to encourage them to apply for it. And I know we've already got comments or questions coming in, but I will, as you have a look at those, start talking through our first case study, unless it's something we should answer straight away.
We've just had a comment come through about some background music. If any people are experiencing that, let us know. As far as we're aware, we don't have any other platforms playing at the same time, but just send us a message if you're also experiencing that background noise, and we'll have a look behind the scenes. But as far as we're aware, we literally just have our PowerPoint presentation and our microphone in the room. So yeah, let us know if you've got any other background music issues, but we'll just proceed on that basis unless you tell us otherwise.
Okay, all right. Let's have a look at our first case study. We've got Mary and John. Mary works at Coles. John did work as a bricklayer. He's been off work for 3 months with a back injury. He expects to be off for another 12 months. They are currently 2 months behind on their mortgage repayments. The lender has refused financial hardship. They're also behind on their body corporate. They're using buy now, pay later to pay for food. And Mary has just accessed some of her pay using a wage advance app, as they couldn't afford groceries this week. They're also concerned about not being able to pay their utility bills. And often in this story, the other one that comes up is they're probably also behind on the council rates, Kiara, which is not great. But this is a typical scenario I think we'd see at Legal Aid, and a lot of financial counsellors that see there as well. So where do we start? Being a lawyer, the first question I'm asking is, has John talked to somebody about accessing maybe partial disability under their super, or depending on how he suffered the back injury at work, might there be a personal injury claim? Legal aid doesn't do that sort of work, but it's always important to still refer them to a private lawyer who can at least explore those issues for our clients, because those payments could contribute to reducing the financial hardship and might allow us to get rid of some of these debts.
Yeah.
That process can take a few months usually, occasionally a year or two, but we're looking for ways to be able to show our creditors that there's a plan out of this financial hardship. Because under the legislation, one of the issues is that in theory with financial hardship, you need to be able to show a way out with your bank.
We've definitely we've had a question as well, or a comment.
Yeah.
So they said workers' comp could come into it.
Yeah.
How would that kind of play?
Yeah, so that's exactly the sorts of things I'm suggesting we need to look at in terms of the back injury. You'd look at workers' comp, you'd look at personal injury, you'd look at, is there something we can access under super,
Yeah.
which is going to give Mary and John that extra income that might allow them to keep their head above water.
Bit of a, like, to alleviate it, just a tiny bit.
Yeah, well, depending on the payments and depending on the super or the payout they get, it might alleviate it potentially entirely. But you've got to explore it.
Of course.
The second thing then is, what do we do and what do we prioritise about these debts? Because we've got a mortgage debt, we've got a body corporate debt, we've got buy now, pay later, we've got wage advances, and we've got utility bills. And I think we've probably also got council rates in there as well, although I haven't said it there.
I think it's definitely implied we all suffer the council rates bill.
So it's likely that if they're struggling to pay all of this, they're struggling to pay that as well, I would have said. The thing about it is, it's often easier to get financial hardship on your mortgage because your financial institution has requirements under legislation. They don't have to give you financial hardship, but the legislation says they have to give it reasonable consideration. So I think that's where I'd be starting. I'd be saying, we need a few months to sort out whether we can access our super, access personal injury claim, etc.
Yep.
To be able to work out whether we can pay this long term.
Okay.
That is a plan out of it, assuming the lawyer says, yes, you've got a claim. If the lawyer says, no, you haven't got a claim, then asking for a bit longer financial hardship probably doesn't get us anywhere, because all that's going to do is make it worse. And when I say make it worse, if you're not paying your mortgage, interest is compounding upon interest, is compounding on interest. And what that means is the little bit of equity they've got would be eaten up really quickly. So you kind of, this is always the hard bit, and financial counsellors online would understand this problem well. We need to give them space to get their head around their circumstances and how the finances might work. But if that goes on too long, we're probably actually making their financial situation worse, because at the moment they've got $50,000 worth of equity. In 12 months' time, they've probably got none. And the only way that gets cured is if the payout and the PI claim actually work. And that's the thing I guess I wanted to emphasise here. You've got to have almost two financial hardship plans here. One is a financial hardship plan if there's a way out, and the second is a financial hardship plan if there's not a way out. So it's probably reasonable to say, can you give us an extra couple of months while we try and work out a plan? But if there's then no obvious plan, you're probably having hard conversations around, is it time to sell? Can you find rental somewhere? And they're really hard conversations to have when most places in Queensland, it's actually really hard to get rent, somewhere to rent. And probably why we're seeing, and I don't know if anybody else has noticed, there's a big increase in people living in cars. There's a big increase in people living in tents. There's a big increase in people living on the streets. And that's a really hard thing to deal with, because if they can't afford their mortgage, the odds are they can't afford their rent either.
And it's not as simple as saying just sell the asset and, you know, go rent somewhere when
you can't find anywhere to rent.
In a crisis, partnered with all the disasters happening lately. So.
And all of the disasters make that worse because people whose houses have been damaged go into temporary accommodation paid for by the insurer, and that further takes potential housing or rental stock out of the market as well. So it's a very much what can the client do and what's going to most help the client on the mortgage. The big thing I want to highlight though is while banks have to look at financial hardship, body corporates and councils don't.
Okay.
Body corporates have no legal obligations to even consider your financial hardship. Some occasionally have something in their bylaws that says they'll look at it, but on the whole, there's nothing. So often you're looking at prioritising, say, paying the body corporate over the mortgage because that's more likely to keep you in your house longer.
Okay.
And similarly, prioritising, because we can never say don't pay a debt, but it is reasonable to explore what you should be prioritising to give you the most amount of time to get yourself back on track. Similarly, some councils have really good hardship policies, although there's no legislative requirement, but some councils don't have a policy at all. And again, that's often down to the council's circumstances. It's often a lot easier for a really big council who's got more money and a bit more scope financially to have good financial hardship policies. And it's a lot harder for smaller councils who might need that money from rates to actually stay afloat to have good hardship policies. Moving though to buy now, pay later. Unfortunately, I'm seeing more and more people, and I know financial counsellors are, who are using buy now, pay later to help themselves pay for food. And the way I've often seen that happen is they might buy gift cards for Coles or Woolies using the money they get from buy now, pay later. So it can often be a bit of a hidden problem that they're using it for food. They owe $1,200. I don't see that it's necessarily Mary and John's fault here for relying on buy now, pay later. Because when you're in financial trouble, your frame of reference, and I think this is a really important part of the financial hardship discussion, your frame of reference shrinks. It goes from how can I plan my next 3, 6, 12 months financially to how do I get to the end of the week? And while we have had some legislation passed that puts more onus on buy now, pay later to look at things like, can people actually afford what we're lending them? Their requirements are not as strong as they are for the payday lenders or the banks or other financial institutions. So that's often why people in serious financial harm end up trying to rely on these products because they're easier for them to get. So I would, in the buy now, pay later sense, they have a code which does refer to a financial hardship, and I would be asking for that.
We have just had a comment. So we also see buy now, pay later groceries via delivery apps.
Yep.
As people don't have fuel or funds for transport to get to the grocery store. So I'm sure that's
absolutely right. We see that as well. That's a good call out to make. And I guess the other thing with that is those delivery apps, by the time you're getting stuff delivered, it's the poverty premium striking again, in the sense that the groceries you're paying for are actually costing you more via those apps than they would if you were able to get to the shops. So that, again, that's a good call out in this space. The problem with, and I'll give you the practical problem with asking for financial hardship from buy now, pay later schemes, is people are relying on them to survive. But if you want financial hardship, some schemes will say that's fine, but we're shutting off your access to buy now, pay later until you reduce the debt.
okay.
And if that happens, then you're probably having to help them with emergency relief, food parcels, things like that, that amazing group of organisations that help people when they literally have nowhere else to go when it comes to food. So that you've probably picked up from this, guys, online, that none of this is simple. Financial hardship sounds really easy and really simple, and I'm sure from working with it, you guys know that's not the case.
We did have a comment to try and access emergency relief in the short term. Is that something you'll be delving into in another part or of the presentation? Or?
In the sense that all I'm going to say is it's worth accessing emergency relief and becoming aware in your local area of who the emergency relief providers are.
Okay.
Because there are specific organisations in various areas who get money specifically to provide emergency relief.
Yeah. The thing is, I was reading somewhere that because there's more and more people relying on them, it can, in and of itself, like then create more problems if they're not getting, you know, enough like kind of money behind them or enough like assistance.
Look, I think the reality, and I'm pretty sure nobody's going to disagree with me here online, the reality is everybody in this space who works in this space could do with more funding.
Yeah.
There is always an unmet need, and that's part of the tragedy of this space. What any of us can focus on is meeting the need that's before us in the best way that we can.
And we've just had, just to kind of carry on from that, someone said emergency relief can be a circuit breaker, otherwise there's just no way to break the cycle.
Absolutely. I think that's another excellent comment. It's about giving people an opportunity to stabilise themselves and then get back on track from there. Now, what haven't we addressed? Utility bills. Most utility companies have pretty good hardship policies that are focused on keeping either the lights on or keeping with people with basic access to water, or say if somebody might require oxygen to breathe, making sure that necessity is met and the electricity stays on so that those people in those positions can stay alive. There are also state government grants available to assist, and I think it's once a year, to assist with helping you pay electricity bills. HIAS is one of those schemes. People online will help me with the acronym there. I just know it as HIAS. Yeah, I think it's the Home Electricity Access Scheme, or words to that.
Home Energy Assistance Scheme.
That's it.
$720 every 2 years. Thank you for that.
Excellent, thank you. I knew the financial counsellors and other workers out there would have my back on that. It's one of the traps of this area. You rely on acronyms and then forget what they mean.
We did have another quick comment. It said, could access to electricity be considered a human right?
Oh, that's a really good question. It's something I've often thought about. As it stands now, the law probably says no.
Okay.
But I think there's a reasonable argument to say that, particularly as the climate continues to warm, that access to electricity allowing you to cool yourself might become something that's a necessity of life.
Okay.
I don't think it's there yet in terms of where we are legally, but I think there's definitely scope for it to become like that. And just to caveat there, I'm not promising to run that case just yet.
Okay.
In case anybody online wants me to do that. Do I think it's worth exploring? Yes, absolutely. Because we are, and people would have seen this recently with Cyclone Alfred and the floods in North Queensland, we don't do so well when we don't have access to our electricity, our phone, our clean water, all of those things we rely on to survive. And so there could very well be an argument along those lines. Now, the final thing on this one that we haven't explored is the Wage Advance Act. Unfortunately, with the Buy Now, Pay Later legislation, my understanding is Wage Advance apps were not caught up as part of that.
Okay.
And the problem I have with Wage Advance apps is if you access some of your pay early and you have to pay it back in 2 weeks' time, with an additional admin fee. When you do that, you're short of money in fortnight 2, and you'll apply for another wage advance to survive until the following fortnight, and then you have to pay that second wage advance back, and then you're short of money again, and you borrow it again, and it becomes a bit of a self-perpetuating cycle, and you're constantly relying on a wage advance act to survive. And that's not a healthy thing at all.
No.
So I'm looking for the only way we get them regulated in the same way as other credit is by the people out there and you and me, when we see those case studies, developing the case that says they have this, if not used correctly, they have the same effect as all of these other products which now require regulation, and they should be regulated too.
Okay.
And I don't think that's giving away any secrets. So I think all credit should be regulated the same way, because all of it involves people borrowing money.
Definitely.
Now I think there's an extra couple of comments coming through
Yes.
along the way.
So had so is it HESA? H-U?
Yeah.
Yeah. It doesn't allow for just financial hardship generally. You need to be able to refer a specific additional cost or loss income.
Yeah.
To contribute to what you were just saying before, some commentary was like the debt spiraling, so that concept of adding to it. Is the way out the possible compensation payout from the work injury? So
yes.
For this case study?
Yeah, I think in terms of way outs, that's really the only option that will correct this.
And are wage event sectors being regulated? So
and the answer is unfortunately not, but collectively I think we can mount the case that they should be.
Okay, that's very interesting.
Now, before we leave this first case study, the other thing I want to talk about that's been definitely on the rise that's in the financial hardship space is people living in cars.
Yeah.
Now, the thing I want everybody to be aware of there is one of the arguments I think collectively we all need to start making to finance companies is they now need to at least consider treating cars in certain circumstances in the same way as they would treat a house. And it really makes me sad to have to say that out loud. But gone are the days where we can just treat all cars as an asset capable of being repossessed and sold without thinking about the consequences. And the consequence of doing that to somebody living in a car is quite horrific because it means they're on the streets.
Certainly, and someone's just said, like with the added security issues as well of living in your car.
Yep, and it's sad that we're saying living in a car which exposes you to a whole heap of risk is a legitimate option for people at the moment. And also leaving aside the fact that there's at least a couple of councils who are trying to ban people living in tents in parks and finding them accordingly. I'm going to park that over there because that's not really financial hardship, but that sort of activity does contribute to people being in financial hardship and finding it a really hard way to survive.
Yes, exactly.
The other thing I want people thinking about, and particularly finance companies thinking about in terms of cars, is people might actually come to you wanting to upgrade their car. And I think it's a really important consideration as you're doing that to think, how can we enable them to do that? Because usually when you're borrowing money for a car, finance companies will want a registered address.
Yeah.
And if you're living in a car, providing that registered address is actually quite hard because you're often moving that car round and round.
There's no set.
Because there's no set place for you to keep it or no safe place for you to keep it. So all of that, I think, contributes to this case study being quite difficult. Yeah. But where we're at with it, I think in summary, is we're looking to help him get a payout of some kind. Either it's a permanent back injury and he's not getting it back, or he needs money temporarily to help him through getting back to work. And then when he's back to work, the argument is, let me show you that I can pay the mortgage for 6 months, and then would you consider putting the arrears on the end of the loan? That would be the option 2 if he was able to go back to work. Option 1, he's not able to go back to work. Then you're hoping he gets a payout to make this work. And then option 3, he's not entitled to a payout and he's not going back to work. We're looking at having to sell, and we're looking at putting him in touch with emergency accommodation people and seeing whether his family can help him out with accommodation temporarily, which is a horrible outcome, but it's one we often see.
Someone has just kind of added on from that conversation about living in your car as well. And just so living in your car means like a higher cost to access food and washing as well.
Absolutely, it does.
So, that can contribute if you're trying to show, your costs and stuff.
And accessing internet is often more expensive. Yeah. You are completely reliant on a phone. And often you might have spent the credit and can't make calls yourself until you get more credit. All of those things impact on the financial hardship and on trying to return or get yourself back out of the financial hardship. So that intervention that we're able to do, we don't want it to be permanent, but we want it to be enough so that people have some control over their lives and getting their lives back on track. So let's wander to the next slide unless there's another question.
So we do have just a couple of quick ones for you, Paul. You've been this is great conversation today. So I'm not sure if this is specific, but someone just said they've been informed that NILs can't be provided to people who are homeless or living in a car, or maintain the existing asset as you can't serve it. Do you?
That's probably a question for your local NILS provider. So for those of you who are unaware what NILS is, it's a no interest loan scheme, and it has specific criteria about what you can access it for. They do have an option for buying a car. I am aware of that, but I'm not sure of the criteria behind it.
Okay.
People like, and I'm not sure if Karen Denham is on the webinar, she's the expert in this area, and I would defer to her and her knowledge of those lines.
Wonderful. And yeah, just a lot of commentary kind of, just increased spurs as well. So people fines up for illegal parking, things like that. So just, continuing that, like you said, that compounding cost after cost. And
potentially being fined for being in the park or attempting to live in the park. There are potential fines around that. So yeah, it snowballs and it spirals, and it makes it very hard.
And someone just commented that they have to have lived in the same address for at least 3 months. I'm not sure what in relation to exactly, but I'm sure that's for a lot of people.
I think that's for the NILS access. I'm not 100% sure on that.
Oh, to access NILS, thank you for that.
Yeah.
So we'll just move to
So let's move to the second case study then. So for those who are interested and want to take away, the next couple of slides are us trying to summarize what we've just discussed and give you some thoughts that if you get something similar, what do I need to look at? All right. And next one, we have a single mother with a 3-year-old son. She works casually in retail, receives a single parent pension. She left a violent relationship, is studying in year 12 and wants to join the armed forces. She has 2 mobile phone contracts and she's got a broken down used car, which she took a loan to get. She also, and I've specifically put, she's been a joint borrower on a motorbike loan. You would not believe the amount of cases I see where a woman in a DV relationship has either bought a motorbike outright and never seen it because her ex has taken it, or has been put as a joint borrower on a motorbike loan. I don't know what it is about young males and buying bikes, but it happens ridiculously. And our other problems are the rent's increased by 30%. That's probably a little low for the rent increase for people in the last 12 months, to be honest. She's not getting as many shifts. She has also pawned her grandmother's jewellery and is desperate to ensure these items are not sold. So the question is, where would we start? Now, what I want to make clear here at the beginning is, and I've fallen into this trap myself, I and a lot of people who are out there helping people in financial hardship, our immediate reaction here is, how are we keeping them in housing? I would just caution, because I've had a number of clients over the years who have said, I don't care about my housing. If I lose my grandmother's jewellery, that'll be the end. And it's really important not to assume what people's priorities are when they're in financial hardship, because what we often assume the priority might be is not the case. So in this situation, let's assume we've got instructions saying jewelry is priority. So the problem we've got is once you've pawned something to a pawnbroker, what happens is the only way you get it back is by paying the payout amount to the pawnbroker. There's not financial hardship available to you to ensure it's not sold. Under the legislation, it's pay the money to get it back or else. So as part of any budget you're doing there, you're going, okay, that's our first priority. How do we keep it back? How do we keep that jewelry and get it back for her? Second thing that's worth thinking about is, do we have any other, is there any other way for her to increase her income a little bit, given her current job, she's not getting as many shifts? That's worth exploring, and that might provide some of that way out. Just to get rid of the motorbike loan for a minute. She's not got a benefit from the motorbike loan and was put as a joint borrower. To me, that screams that she shouldn't have been put as a joint borrower and she should have been put as a guarantor. Under the legislation, if that happens, she's out of this loan. And the reason I say she's out of this loan is there's specific requirements under the banking code and in legislation that you have to follow when somebody is a guarantor. And if they don't follow it, the guarantee doesn't exist or is not valid, and she's not a joint borrower. So we can probably do some good stuff there. Notice there's another comment or question.
Yeah, so they said you can contact the bank to advise she's not getting use of the bike and explain of the DV, so they treat her according to their DV policy.
That's one option. I often find it's quicker to get her out on the guarantee issue.
Okay.
But you would absolutely raise the DV with the bank, because that should see them helping in other ways in addition to getting rid of the motorbike loan.
Is that something that like all banks have, or a lot of banks, or?
Like nearly all financial institutions have a family violence and domestic violence policy that I'm aware of.
Okay.
But what they're able to do under that policy often varies quite markedly.
Okay.
So you lose nothing by contacting them about it and seeing what they're able to do to help your client. Now, can we just flick back one slide?
Yeah.
So we look at the issues on that one. So let's just.
It's not
There we go.
Sorry, Paul, just one last thing to
Yep.
back on that guarantor discussion.
Yep.
So we've just had a couple of questions. Can you please explain how the guarantor issue would be dealt with in the context, I guess, of this case study? Which,
Yep.
And then is it, someone was just saying joint borrow the same as a guarantor, which you've kind of explained.
Yeah. So let's start with that one first. So joint borrower and guarantor are two different things. If you're a joint borrower, you and your other borrower are jointly and severally liable to pay back that loan. So what that means is the finance company can choose to recover that money either from both of you or one of you. And if it's one of you, they can still recover the full amount. So it's joint borrowers, you don't split the debt 50-50. You are both liable to ensure all of it's paid back.
Okay.
Guarantor is different. Guarantor is where you have a borrower and then you have a guarantor. The guarantee that they give is only called in if the borrower doesn't pay. So the way that should be set up is if the person getting the benefit is the borrower and person who's guaranteeing it isn't really getting a benefit, but has agreed because they're nice to pay it if not, or in a DV situation agreed to pay it because they've been told they'll be hit if they don't. But there's specific legislation around guarantees that says, or it's the banking code requirements, that you have to give people giving a guarantee specific information. And if you don't, the guarantee is not valid and the guarantee would go. So what your argument here would be, should never have been a joint borrower because they got no benefit. They should have been a guarantor. You haven't given me all of what you should have under the banking code to ensure I was aware of what I was getting myself into as a person giving a guarantee. And if they haven't done that, guarantee is not valid and she's out entirely. That would be the argument. And that's often successful. Not always. You never have 100% success at this stuff, but it's pretty close.
Thank you for that.
Now, the other issues, mobile phone contracts. Our ex-partner has the other phone. I would be letting the telco company know all about that and seeing if there's some way of that phone being recovered or maybe turned off so it can't be used. Not sure you'll be successful in that, but worth a try.
Okay.
But if you're 1 month behind on your phone payments, it's worth seeing whether they'll give you financial hardship in that space. But the other thing I'd make sure about the mobile phone contracts is I would be making sure if there's DV, he doesn't have access to that account, because there would be a risk, depending on what sort of details on that telephone account, about an ability to track her through the phone.
Of course, like through locations.
Through locations and stuff like that. So that would be something I'd be aware of in that space.
So we did have, so there are a couple of questions on the guarantor if you wanted to.
Yeah, let's keep with the guarantor. If I'm not explaining it as well as I could have,
No,
let's go with the
it's
questions.
wonderful. So this was just, so can you remove her as a guarantor in the loan in the case of coercive control?
Yes, absolutely you can.
And then the next question was, to argue that the guarantor case, do we need to engage legal help or can we make it ourselves to the bank? So I'm as a financial counsellor.
I am happy for you to make that yourself because you're as equally able as I am to know whether they got a benefit or not,
yeah,
and whether or not there was DV.
Okay.
To me, that doesn't require a lawyer.
So to the mobile phone question, someone's just submitted, it can also be a security issue if the phone is switched off as well. Okay, so just to be aware. Yeah,
absolutely it can, because sometimes you need to contact people because the perpetrator might have found you. Unfortunately, all sorts of interrelating issues.
Yeah, and definitely all connect so
absolutely.
Definitely aware of that.
Absolutely. Now, the used car, I reckon nearly everybody online will have had a client where somebody's bought a used car. And look, I've been generous here at having it break down within 3 months. Usually it's in the first week. And then people are often paying a finance or a loan for a car that doesn't work.
Yeah.
And the difficulty with that is the loan and the car purchase are 2 separate transactions. And so while you're trying to resolve the non-working car, you're still liable to pay a loan for a car that you can't drive. And that's a problem for a lot of people. What can you do about the dodgy used car? Look, usually in these cases, I'm saying a silent prayer of hope that nobody's paid a lot of money for a warranty, because my experience is those warranties are pretty hard to access. For those of you who don't know what a warranty is, in theory, it's something where you pay, let's pick a figure, $300 a year to allow you to get the car fixed if it breaks down. People find it almost impossible to access, and often the warranties don't give you any more legal rights than you have under the Australian Consumer Law. And the Australian Consumer Law requires any car that you buy to be of acceptable quality and fits for its purpose.
So that kind of fits in, someone's just asked, how strong are the laws around motor vehicle warranties?
Yeah, so yeah, I find that's what you rely on. Where it becomes a little tricky is how long should a used car last for? If you're buying a used car that's 2 years old and has 40,000 K on the clock, that might be different to a used car that has 300,000 K on the clock. And why there exists in state legislation in Queensland, and this is one of the rare state legislation stuff we're talking about today, there's actually statutory warranties of 3 and 1 month that differ depending on how many kilometres is on the clock, on the speedo. And that dividing line from memory is 150,000 kilometres.
Okay.
So you do have a statutory warranty, but I find it's better to access the Australian Consumer Law remedies.
Someone's just commented, check if the car dealership has linked the credit to the lender.
Yeah. So what you're trying to do, and you're a step ahead of me, so congratulations.
Okay.
Congratulations. What you're trying to do is get the car contract dealt with in the sense of you should never have given me this car because it's a heap of junk and I shouldn't have to pay any money for it. If you succeed with that, if it's a linked credit contract, the credit contract also falls over as well under the National Consumer Credit Code. But it's not, you've got to, in a sense, get rid of the car contract before you can rely on the linked credit contract.
Okay.
So it's a really good question, and that's how you approach it, but you've still got to try and deal with the car contract before you can deal with the credit contract in that space.
Okay.
Unless you can argue that the credit contract was irresponsibly lent and you could never have afforded to pay it back, which is always worth exploring, because in my experience, there are a number of companies out there who lend car loans and aren't the best at assessing whether people can afford to pay those loans back. It's always worth exploring.
Someone has asked, how does a linked credit contract differ to a secured loan? Is that something you're able to shed any light on?
Look, often some secured loans will be linked to credit.
Okay.
Because security is a bit different, because that's the lender saying we're protecting ourselves by securing the value of the car against this loan. Linked credit contract is more of a consumer remedy where you're arguing that because the credit contract was linked to the dodgy consumer contract, it should fall over as well. And so what that means is often a linked credit contract could also have security on it, but that doesn't affect your rights to access that.
Okay, thank you for that. That's it for the questions at the
Cool.
moment.
Okay, let's move back to the second slide for case study 2. All right. The one thing we haven't addressed there is the rental increase. I'll be honest, I don't have a solve for that. If anybody has a solve for that, let me know.
Yes, please do. It's a
there is rent assistance available from the government, but the reality is that's not going to make it any more affordable for a lot of people. Because the rent assistance is not enough.
Yeah, they've just said, the rental security subsidy scheme. A few people have commented that, but it's $10,000 over 2 years.
Yeah. Yeah. Which for some people might solve the problem.
Yeah.
But for a whole bunch it probably won't.
No.
All right. So I know we've got about 10 minutes to go, so we're tracking pretty well, but now's probably the time for people, if there's any other questions or things you thought I was going to answer this morning that we haven't talked about yet, well worth doing.
Just some more commentary on the rent assistance. So someone said they could dispute the rent increase and also check any rent assistance applicable with Centrelink.
Yeah.
Both
of which are good. And in Queensland, Tenants Queensland is your port of call for those questions.
And someone said try to deal with the real estate if the renters had a good history.
And that's one of our colleagues from Tenants Queensland, actually. So thank you, Abby. They give very good advice in that space and doing some good work following the recent disasters as well. So that's the other thing. The only way collectively we address this is by working collaboratively. And I love in Queensland the fact that CLCs, legal aid, financial counsellors, other community workers all tend to collaborate really, really well.
That's great.
Now, where are we headed from here, I guess is the question. Interest rates last month came down a little bit. I think it's going to require more than one interest rate drop to help people out of a lot of the problems. Because what's happened in the last 2 years, people might have had some savings, which they've now eaten up in order to survive. So that's a bit of an issue. The second issue I find that's putting people over the edge is a bit of illness, whether that be cancer diagnosis, whether that be getting COVID for a couple of weeks and then getting long COVID. That's what's making people very difficult, because there's a lot of people, I find it very unfortunate. There's a lot of people doing very well, but there's also a lot of people who are really, really struggling. And I think the important thing here in that space is us providing a way where people are comfortable to seek help. Because there's still a bit of an attitude in society where if you're not doing well financially, you must have done something wrong. And my experience is actually very different. Some of the best managers of money I've ever seen are the people on the lowest income, because they've actually made a little stretch a really long way, usually for a really long time. And when it tips over, it's because there's just no other way.
We just had a couple of questions back on, so back on the car, what would be the first step in backing out of a private motor vehicle purchase in the case of the car not being fit for purpose?
Right, so when we say private, do we mean, I guess there's two potential ways. Have we bought it from a registered car yard, or have we bought it via private sale? Because there's way more protection if you bought it from a registered car yard.
Okay.
I'm not a fan, for example, if anybody's bought a car off Facebook, please don't do it.
They've said private sale, so maybe that would be a...
So the private sale, usually I find you're going to end up in QCAT arguing that they haven't provided. You couldn't do it under motor vehicle because they're not a motor vehicle trader, but you could arguably still do it under QCAT because you've been provided with something that doesn't work.
Okay. I'm not sure if this would constitute as specific advice, but someone said, is it legal for creditors to charge a risk fee for a car loan?
Depends what that fee is actually defined as. That's probably worth getting some advice about around what that risk fee is. I suspect they've put a fee in there because they think the person is at greater risk of default.
Okay.
Usually where I see that play out rather than as a risk fee is they just get charged a higher interest rate.
So one last car one, and then we might move to just some of the other last questions before we wrap up.
Sure.
Thank you as well. Everyone's been so engaging today. Can a client opt to not have a warranty when purchasing a second?
Absolutely.
And so when you were discussing before about pawned goods, they said what other options are available with those items that you take to a pawn shop?
In terms of getting them back, I wonder. Because what happens is, let's say, well, one option is you don't want a pawned good back.
Yeah.
And if that's the case, the only rights the pawnbroker has is to sell the pawned goods.
Yeah.
And if selling the pawned goods doesn't cover the amount of money they've given you, their problem, not yours.
Okay.
That's potentially the only other option.
So there is another question about the car. Do you want me to take that to later?
No, please. The car's been popular. Let's deal with it.
Very popular. What would be considered to be a reasonable fee for setting up a car loan? Is there a ratio?
Nothing in the legislation.
Okay, there we go.
I can nearly guarantee whichever one you're talking about, it's probably larger than it should be.
Okay. Someone's just made a comment. They said frequent check-ins with the clients to see if they need or want any emotional wellbeing assistance or counselling to move forward, as this case scenario, I think referring to Taylor's, shows the hardship in all areas of life, so relationship, employment, increase of work opportunities, etc. So
I think that's a really excellent point, and why I was highlighting the fact I love the collaboration that occurs, because there's no one of us that can meet all the needs of somebody that's in financial hardship. It requires all of us working together to make it work.
Definitely, some great work being done. If you have any questions, maybe send them through now, otherwise we might be reaching the end of our presentation today. And
so my takeaways, I think, for this are: ask questions, be aware, and this is something creditors are bad at, the hardship. They could present with that hardship 1 month into their hardship, or 5 years into their hardship, or anywhere in between. People where they are and when they get into the mental space of being ready to talk about this.
Yeah.
The one final thing we haven't mentioned that's important in the hardship space is be aware of where the person's credit report and credit rating is at, because often that's very central to people's sense of financial well-being. I'm not sure it's always in proportion to its true sense or true relevance, but I find a lot of clients want to protect that at all else. And there's a lot of nuance to that space, which we don't have time to engage with today, but it's something I want people to think about in the back of their mind.
Very good. Thank you, Paul. Just some positive feedback. So yes, thank you again. It's been great. And thank you to the audience. You've been very engaging as well. I hope that you've had some great takeaways. And if you do have any other questions that you may not have been able to type out, you can send it through to us at webinars@legalaid.qld.gov.au, and we can forward them on to the team.
And remembering too that if you've got clients affected by Alfred or the flooding, Legal Aid has a priority line that gets answered pretty well straight away to help people with those issues, which is 1300 527 700.
So great, he's memorized everything. So
probably a sign of I've been around too long.
No, I think it's just really great work. So we'll just a little bit of some quick wrap up here. So our main legal information and referral line is 1300 651188. We do have a priority line for Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander calls, so 1300 650143. And if you already have a grant of aid submitted, any questions, please contact us on 1300 383 900. You can also view and order any of our publications completely for free on the Legal Aid Queensland website. So if you just have a visit, you'll be able to make those orders there. Watch out for our webinars next month. We actually have 2 in April. So we have one on the 24th, which is about our adult restorative conferencing, and one on the 30th, which will go through our proof of parentage and DNA services. This webinar and all of our webinars are available on our YouTube channel, and they are captioned, completely accessible and free for everyone. And of course, give us a follow on Facebook, LinkedIn, and Instagram and X for any upcoming topics, dates, and other useful legal information. Thank you again, Paul.
Thank you.
Thank you to our audience, and thank you to our interpreters, and hope that you have a wonderful afternoon.